l'Afrique du Canada. I would like to acknowledge that the Africa Study Group is hosting this meeting, this very important meeting, from Ottawa on the unceded traditional days of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Je tiens à souligner que nous tenons cette session à partir d'Ottawa, territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple Anishinaabe Algonquin. Excellencies, members of the diplomatic and consular corps, dear members of the civil society, dear members of the Canadian African diaspora and of the African diaspora, dear members of the Africa Study Group, dear members of the Canadian International Council, dear members of the media here present, we are very happy that you are here today online and here in the room. Dear guests from all backgrounds, I welcome each of you here in this room and with so many people online, and thank you for accepting our invitation. We are delighted to welcome you to this hybrid webinar on the thematic of global priorities, local perspective, reflection of the 2025 G20 Summit in South Africa. Discussion post-G20, priorité mondiale, perspective locale, réflexion sur le sommet du G20 de 2025 en Afrique du Sud. Bienvenue. We initiated this webinar with a strong belief that effort to foster greater awareness and understanding of the world in Canada will amplify Canada's voice and influence on the global stage, and it will strengthen international cooperation between Canada and the rest of the world. Nous avons initié ce webinaire avec la ferme conviction que les efforts visant à favoriser une meilleure connaissance et compréhension du monde au Canada permettront d'amplifier la voix et l'influence du Canada sur la scène internationale et renforcer aujourd'hui, en ces moments difficiles, la compréhension entre les peuples et l'importance du continent africain général et des pays émergents. Events and sessions of the Africa Study Group are strictly guided by the principles of independence, impartiality, and fact-based analysis. Today's session is moderated by my colleague, Dr. Marcia Burdett, the Deputy Chair of the Africa Study Group, who, with a PhD in political sciences from Columbia University, New York, pursued an academic career followed by 25 years with Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She has a long-standing interest in Africa, in particular Central and Southern Africa. Her book, Zambia Between Two Worlds, and a series of articles focus on the major economic transition of the country when its new leaders embarked on the nationalization of the copper industry, the country's main economic engine. Subsequent articles written by Marshall dealt with input industry for Zimbabwe agriculture sector in the 90s. Without further delay, I will now hand over to Marcia.
Thank you, Jay. My name is Marcia Burdett, and I am the Deputy Chair. And bienvenue à tous. I'll be the moderator for this session. I want to thank the two panelists to begin. One who's sitting to my right is High Commissioner Mo Sheikh from South Africa, and online in Montreal is Professor John Curtin, who attend from there. So let me do a very brief scene setting for the webinar, and then I will discuss how we will run it. The Trump presidency, might as well start with the elephant in the room, is especially the second one, has thrown into disarray aspects of the multilateral system, and which had been in place in the past half century. Part of that older system were regular meetings or big summits of different geographic groupings. Perhaps the most prominent is the G7 Summit, which draws together the leaders of the global north. And the most recent G7 Summit was past June in Canada. It was Prime Minister Carney's first hosting of this important multilateral summit. And under his leadership, many leaders of the global south were invited, including South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Just this past November, the G20 Summit was held in South Africa. Then the G20 summits draw together the global north and the global south. And it's a forum for broader decision-making, sometimes financial decisions, and some conflict prevention. Prime Minister Carney made his first trip to the continent of Africa to attend this meeting in Johannesburg. And this was also the first G20 meeting for the African Union as a member. And then finally, the first is that it was the first G20 summit hosted by an African country, in this case, South Africa. And as many of you know, President Trump stayed away from this meeting, despite the US holding the chair for the next G20 summit. So there's some political issues out there along many of them. To help us analyze this event, we turned to Professor John Curtin, who spoke to our group back in June and who has just returned from the G20 Summit. And joining us today is to provide the South African perspective, is South Africa's High Commissioner to Canada, His Excellency Riaz Sheikh. We've asked the panelists to give you all the main takeaways from the recent G20 Summit. We hope they can offer some insight on the evolving role of the G20. And of course, we appreciate their commentary and any topic they think is relevant to this group and this webinar. Let me explain how the webinar will actually function. We have about an hour and a half for the time allotted. First, I will do a little bit more introduction of our two panelists. Then, and each of them have been asked to speak for approximately 15, 20 minutes. We're going to start with Professor Curtin from the background perspective. After they have spoken, we will turn to question and answers for the webinar. Obviously, for those of you in the room, all you need to do is put your hand up and we will note you. And for those of you online, and we have quite a number of people who are attending online, maybe partly because of this bitter, bitter cold morning, please put your hand up on the electronic bottom of the thing. And we've asked the young man sitting by the board to keep an eye that the hand shows, and we will try to make sure to bring you in. And obviously, one of the rules of such a short time period, we've asked you to keep your questions short and leaving time for answers, and so we can also get more people to speak. And your questions can be in French or English. So let me start with a more detailed introduction of Professor John Curtin. He's the director and founder of the Global Governance Program, which includes the G7 Research Group and the G20 Research Group. Also another group called the BRICS Research Group and the Global Health Diplomacy Group. All of these based at the University of Toronto, where he is a professor emeritus of political science, having taught global summit governance, diplomacy, and Canadian foreign policy. He's a fellow at Trinity College, senior fellow at the Graham Center for Contemporary International History at the University of Toronto. And he's led a team of analysts every G7 Summit since 1988 and every G20 Summit since the first one in Washington in 2008. He's got a long list of his publications, but we've got time limitations. So I'm just going to go to thank him for coming to attend us and speak to us. Before we go to John, let me just do a quick introduction.
You can skip.
Skip your introduction. I have to say one thing. Your introduction from the Africa Study Group is Professor, His Excellency Riyad Sheikh is known affectionately in Ottawa and by us as Mo Sheikh. So just to give you an idea of fondness for this gentleman and his thanks for attending.
I would just
Yes.
use the opportunity, I'm sorry, my
Yes.
apologies, to introduce also Mr. Rand Clark,
Oh, Ryan Clark, yes.
who is the Director General for Southern and Eastern Africa.
Yes.
Africa
Yes.
at Global Affairs Canada.
And I think you're
You're
new to
welcome,
the
sir.
Africa Study Group, so you're most welcome.
But not new to Africa, but yes, thank you for having us. Sorry for the late. Your campus is vast.
It is, and this place is a bit hard to find.
Sounded.
Yes.
We are home here, but lost today.
All right, so John, we're going to turn over the role to you.
Great. Bonjour, bienvenue. It's great to be with you at my old alma mater, the Norman Patterson School, and co-presenting with a fellow member of the Commonwealth family. By way of due disclosure, I should mention that I'm a Canadian citizen, as was Nelson Mandela while he was alive. That my son-in-law speaks Ndebele as his native tongue, which is one of South Africa's 11 official languages, and that President Ramaphosa had invited me to give him a hand in producing the mandatory G20 at G20 report, a deliverable for the Johannesburg summit, which we did in a complex process and not the only one there. In my 20 minutes, I've been asked to answer three questions. What is the G20? What did it accomplish at its Johannesburg summit on November 22nd to 23rd? And what is its evolving role now that Donald Trump has assumed its presidency for 2026? My answers are as follows. G20 summitry has been successful since its start in November 2008 through to its 20th Summitberg in Johannesburg, South Africa, a few weeks ago. There, despite the boycott by Donald Trump, the G20 summit survived and thrived, making substantial advances on Africa's priorities of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, and development, above all, the key concerns of the Global South. And it will work well enough in the coming year, even though Donald Trump has banished South Africa from the group and set the very different priorities of the economy, energy, and technology to favor the global north and America first. And looking even further ahead, the G20 will continue to work for Africa, the global south, and development, especially when the United Kingdom takes the presidency for 2027. So first, a word on the G20. It was conceived by Canadian Finance Minister Paul Martin in response to the Latin American financial crises in 1994. And after the Asian-turned financial crises, he co-created it with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers in 1999 as a forum for finance ministers and central bank governors of a new class of countries systemically significant States, which South Africa was from the start and still is. And that's why both Paul and Larry put it in without any questions from the very start. They guided it through its early years at the finance minister's level. But when the American turned global financial crises erupted on September 15th, 2008, that convinced a hitherto reluctant US President George Bush to elevate it to the leader's level, as Paul Martin had long wanted, and to host its first summit in Washington, D.C., November 14th to 15th, 2008. G20 leaders then held 2 summits a year until 2011. Canada did the 4th in Toronto in 2010. But then they went into semi-retirement. They dropped to 1 a year until the COVID-19 pandemic led Italy as host to mount a second special summit on health in 2021. So South Africa has just hosted the 20th regular summit in Johannesburg 16 days ago. The first G20 summits, the first 20 of them, have seen all of the 19 country members host at least one. And they have performed at an average level of, well, we academics grade a B, a mid-B, 75%. Attendance by members' leaders has averaged 92%. The summit's collective outcome documents, whatever they're called, agreed to by all members, have averaged over 12,000 words. And leaders' collective, precise, future-oriented, politically obligatory commitments have averaged 172 at each of the 20 summits. And most importantly, members' compliance with those commitments has averaged 71%. B minus, about an average grade, but we certainly need them to do more. There has been some variation year over year and a small decline since the start. Phase 1, 2008 to 2012, when the focus was on combating financial crises, performance averaged 79%. The second phase, 2013 to 2019, the focus shifted to development. Performance declined to 77%. And the third phase, from 2020 to 2025, performance slid a bit further to 74%. And I should note that the G20 at 20 review largely sees the same trend. These summits are well worth doing, but they should be improved a lot. At Johannesburg, the G20 summit survived and thrived despite the boycott by Donald Trump's United States. All the other leaders and governments participated. They produced a substantial performance. It ranked 11th amongst the 20 regular summits that have now been held. And those average B. So in that sense, Johannesburg was a regular productive G20 summit amidst all the drama that surrounded it. It did issue, for the first time in summit history, a consensus declaration at the very start of the summit. And that was the most momentous moment, or one of the two, in G20 summit history. Donald Trump had said, no declaration at all, because I'm not there, or even though I'm not there. He said no, and all the other members' governments said go and issued a declaration. Now, importantly, only 67% of the G20 members sent their leaders. So that was the lowest portion ever. But they did produce a declaration of almost 11,000 words, close to the summit average. And that declaration contained 195 commitments. That was above the overall summit's average of 171. So Johannesburg overperformed here. And in the end game, Trump ended his complete boycott by agreeing to have the presidency handover ceremony from South Africa to the United States take place. If at a junior foreign ministry level, and in the week after the summit's end, another victory for President Ramaphosa. And even more importantly, all the other leaders agreed to identify the presidency for the 2 years after the United States. So the United Kingdom will host in 2027. And as we speak, it's now part of the governing troika of present, past, and future presidencies. So at the moment, if the troika matters, it's not just Donald Trump alone. It's Donald Trump with Cyril Ramaphosa and Sir Keir Starmer by his side, two of our key members of our Commonwealth family. And the year after that, it is Korea for 2028, rather reproducing the sequence at the start, although we will note that between the UK and Korea and the United States, at the beginning, Canada had its turn, and we haven't been identified in the same sequence this year. A closer look at the 6 dimensions of performance, I think, really does confirm that overview. Leaders' attendance, unprecedentedly small, the first ever full boycott by a member, and not just any member, the United States, the institutional co-founder of the G20, its most powerful member, and a member what it boycotted of the governing troika, and the country holding the presidency for the following year. The United States had already made its plans for its summit public in unusual detail several months before the Johannesburg summit take place. And Trump's boycott led Argentina's president to boycott too, another first. And also skipping the summit were Russian President Vladimir Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and at the very last minute, Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto. So 7 leaders skipped the summit, and from some of the most powerful countries in the world. So that was a big hit. But on another indicator of domestic political management, leaders go abroad to work for the folks back home. The domestic political approval of the summit in the media in South Africa, in Africa, in the global South was very strong. So it did work for President Ramaphosa at home. Deliberation performance, very strong. That declaration at the start of the summit, almost 11,000 words, close to the average, and it was much longer than an earlier version of that declaration, which only had about 7,000 words in it from about a month before. So the more Trump said no, the more everyone else said go and put more in the declaration. And the content was quite solid. On the other hand, if that was the public deliberation, the private deliberation amongst the leaders themselves saw a performance that was unusually small. For the first time in G20 Summit history, the first of the three sessions was live streamed and often included the audio of the leaders' speeches. And since so many non-leaders of so many members were there, and of the many guests who gave speeches, the session really resembled the opening of the United Nations General Assembly far more than a normal G7 summit or any of the G7 summits before. So the world could watch other real leaders fiddle with their iPhones and not pay attention to what was being said. The third dimension, direction setting. The G20 has two distinctive foundational missions: preserving financial stability and making globalization work for all. And on the second, the one preferred by the global South, affirmations of those values were very strong. The emphasis on development, equality, and inclusiveness throughout. Decision-making, the number of commitments significant, 195 I mentioned, well above the summit average. But 70% of them were rather weak commitments and unambitious, where the leaders were promising basically to continue doing what they had done before. The subjects they covered were quite comprehensive. They were led by those on development and crime and corruption, two priorities for the global South and certainly for South Africa too. Next came food security. That was the priority for Lula of Brazil, who hosted the summit the year before. And then a big surprise to many, but it warmed the Canadian heart, gender equality, along with cultural and tourism. And then came climate change. Take that, Donald Trump. And the digital economy, energy and health, and then disasters, education, and others. But the focus of the original G20 summits, macroeconomic policy, trade and investment, they came only well down the list. So it was a strong shift from the back to basics beginning to the development priorities of the global South. Another thing that stood out were 6 commitments on regional security. Almost all of them were strong commitments, and they specifically addressed the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, the war in Sudan, and elsewhere. So those who say, oh, the G20 summit really should go back to basics, it's about the economy and nothing but. South Africa proved even more than before that it was a central global security governor too. The delivery of these decisions, we're all used to politicians making promises that they don't keep. So paper proclamations really mean very little unless the leaders and their governments act on them when they go back home. And here it looks like delivery of these 195 decisions will be very small. The United States had historically low compliance of only 27% with the priority commitments from the previous summit. And Trump was president from most of that time. And so without him even there this year, why would he comply with any of the commitments at all? Very few of the Johannesburg commitments contained obligations to monitor and report on implementation. And a very few were on the subjects that an absent Donald Trump preferred. But I should note that members' overall compliance with their Rio commitments averaged 70%, very close to the overall summit average since the start of 71%. So what seems to have happened during the past year is while the Donald Trump's US was doing less, and less, and next to nothing to get to the 27%, all of the other members seem to be doing more to get the overall average up to a normal 70%. And it could be that we'll see the same dynamic in the coming year. The sixth and final dimension, the institutional development of global governance. For the G7 or G20 itself, developing G20 governance performance was strong, above all by identifying the presidencies for the next 3 years, US, UK, and Korea, and also building on supporting many other G20 institutions in the declaration. But outside the G20, performance was small. There were a few references to the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, but no promise to raise any more money for them or even reform them at a time when Donald Trump was taking their money away and walking away from them in the case of the WHO and global health. But the Johannesburg Summit actually did mobilize money for them to provide global public goods. It inspired the replenishment summit of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria to be held the day before the G20 summit and in the same city. And that summit raised $11 billion of its $14 billion goal. Very good. And Donald Trump's United States contributed $4.6 billion, the largest sum by far of anyone in any G20 member. And the Global Fund, as many of you know very well, it's dedicated in the first instance to ending HIV/AIDS, the infectious disease, which is the largest killer of South Africans. So paradoxically, Trump's money did much for South Africa and its people's health, even if his presence and his proclamations did not. Um, now, Donald Trump is now got the presidency. And as soon as he did, he immediately went to work to transform the G20 to make it work for America first. He removed all of South Africa's content from the official G20 website, which he now controlled. He banished South Africa from the first preparatory Sherpa meeting he called for December 15th to 16th in Washington, D.C. And he said he would not invite President Ramaphosa to his G20 summit on December 13th to 14th, 2026. He even said South Africa should be expelled from the G20 for good and replaced by Poland, which he had already invited as a guest, and promised Poland that it would have an enhanced role. He also reaffirmed the priorities and approach he had sent months before, basically a streamlined, stripped down back to basics summit focused on the three priorities of the economy, energy, and technology. No more solidarity, equity, equality, and sustainability. The administration also strongly signaled that there were unlikely to be any ministerial meetings beyond the basic ones for ministers of finance and probably foreign affairs. And this was a reaffirmation of his outline for his summit, which he issued in a live video, a very long one from the White House on the afternoon of September 5th, 2025. He said that the location would be the Trump-owned National Doral Golf Course just outside Miami, and that he had chosen it for his G7 summit in 2020, but had withdrawn it as a location in the face of widespread criticism of a conflict of interest from Democrats and some Republicans alike. But this time there was no pushback at all. Trump suggested it would take place in December, and it was later confirmed it would indeed take place in December on the 13th to the 14th. That's later than normal. Usually it's been November, so the takeover is a few days after that. He did say he was losing money because he was donating his golf course to the G20 for that time, because that was the peak season in Florida for high-priced people to come and play golf at it. But he would do it for the G20 on a cost recovery basis. So very much the real estate developer approach to the summit as a whole. He did imply then in September that he would invite all G20 leaders, including Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. He didn't seem to know that they were members. He said he would invite them as guests. So if he tries to go ahead with that, a big issue arises, well, for Vladimir Putin in particular, on the Ukrainian front. And as I mentioned, he also said he would invite Poland, making the summit in its representation more a club of a Eurocentric global North, exactly the opposite of what Paul and Larry thought the world needed back in 1999. Trump said the agenda would be smaller, it would be a back to basics summit with a streamlined agenda and focus, aligned with the G20's initial mission as the Trumpians conceived of it, of economic growth and financial stability. Trump said specifically it would focus on unleashing economic prosperity by eliminating the burdensome regulations, by unlocking affordable energy, and pioneering new technologies. And he later identified the energy grid, oil production, construction, blue-collar wages, tariffs, incoming direct investment into the United States as his priorities. And he said in charge of it, and not just the finance track, but everything, would be his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. That was another G20 summit first. And Scott Bessent's piped in to say, we've whittled down the G20 back to basics. We are making it work for the American people better than ever. So when I say he's making the G20 work for America first and America only, I'm just quoting his Treasury Secretary, right? I'm not exaggerating what the Trumpians have said. And they also signaled no ministerial meetings beyond finance and foreign affairs, which is a big loss. The South African presidency had more ministerial meetings throughout the year than ever before. The American government officials participated in many of them. They agreed to several of the declarations which those ministers produced, which made it much easier for the leaders and governments at Johannesburg to actually raise those agreements in them to the leaders' level to produce the 195 commitments. Moreover, what we do know is that the leaders' commitments are more likely to be complied with on subjects where a ministerial meeting has also been held. So almost no ministerials probably means less compliance with whatever Miami leaders or governments agree. So that's where things stand now.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm sitting here thinking of our second panelist to speak.
Indeed.
And thank you very much for that excellent background.
Thank you very much. I really want to thank my colleagues, diplomatic corps, who made it on this very cold day here. I really do appreciate it. And of course, the rest of you, Brian and John, share a unique thing that they were both in South Africa for the G20. John, who is my boss from Global Affairs here, kept me very busy during the period the G20, but it was, I think, successful. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to reflect on South Africa's role as a chair of the G20 over the past year, viewed through the lens of global priorities, local perspectives. I would posit up front that in a tumultuous, fragmented, and increasingly unpredictable world in which we live, that the mere convening of any important summit, be it BRICS, ASEAN, G7, G20, is in itself a success. This is so because such summits reinforce the power and the capacity of international cooperation as the necessary tool to address solutions to the manifestations of our global discontent. Accordingly, it's difficult for me to see how we can solve the challenges of the world polycrises in the absence of international cooperation. In the interdependent world in which we live, no country, no matter how big and powerful, can resolve the global challenges that we confront acting unilaterally. In assessing South Africa's performance as G20 chair, I offer you three parameters. First, I argue that South Africa achieved isomorphic excellence by its conduct of an active, non-aligned posture in the workings of the G20. Second, I enumerate South Africa's substantial achievements since assuming the chair in November 2024. And lastly, I would argue that South Africa sought to imprint a G20 legacy by elevating the voice of the marginalized global south, and in particular that of Africa. South Africa's G20 stewardship can be best described as isomorphic excellence within an active non-alignment policy framework grounded within the spirit of Ubuntu and wrapped with the warmth of African hospitality. Ubuntu, as we all know, is I am because you are, and it is very akin to the Dakota language use of the words mitakuye uyasin, we are all related. So it seems to me that one of the other important achievements of the summit was to bring indigenous knowledge to the forefront of what we do in the G20. And of course, African hospitality, as you know, is beyond the drums and the warmth and the singing and the dancing, but it's just generally that we share. It is in our nature as Africans to share everything that we have. South Africa assumed the G20 presidency in 2024, becoming the first African state to do so. This occurs in a fragmented geopolitical environment marked by intensified great power rivalry, weakened multilateralism, and rising middle power activism. South Africa's declared foreign policy approach, non-aligned, but not neutral, emphasizes strategic autonomy, issue-based cooperation, and reform of global governance institutions. Let me conceptualize what is active non-alignment. It is a pragmatic foreign policy orientation used by middle powers such as South Africa, and once upon a time, and I think still so, Canada, to maintain strategic distance from great power blocs, engage in diversified diplomacy, advance the normative agenda such as equity, multilateral reform, and South-South cooperation, and to leverage multilateral platforms for influence while avoiding entanglement in rivalries. Isomorphic excellence is derived from the institutional isomorphism theory describing when a state, such as South Africa, adopts global best practices, institutional behaviors, and agenda-setting capacity. 2 is to perform these roles with competence, legitimacy, and agenda-setting capacity. To use this performance to enhance status, recognition, and a voice in global governance. So let's evaluate the performance of major power functions that South Africa undertook. South Africa effectively and efficiently chaired throughout its presidency the world's premier economic governance forum, coordinating finance and shepherd tracks and set agenda priorities. This elevated its profile beyond its material power base, and as John has said, even adopting the leaders' declaration at the beginning of the summit. Capacity and legitimacy signaling. Effective management of the G20 presidency signals institutional maturity, diplomatic professionalism, and the ability to convene diverse global actors, all of which are hallmarks of excellence. The presidency of South Africa enabled it to position itself as a bridge between the North and the South, reinforcing its identity as a system-shaping middle power, and strengthened its claim as an integral part of the leadership of Africa and the global South. Equidistant diplomacy, by hosting the G20 with balanced engagement with the US, EU, China, India, Russia, Brazil, and others, reflected the active non-alignment's refusal to side with any geopolitical bloc or to diminish its integrity or prestige as the chair. And of course, the matter that John referred to about the handover, when it was required that the handover takes place to an official from the embassy of the United States in South Africa, in the presence of so many heads of state, even though there would be 67% of them, would have meant to demean the prestige of the actual hosting of the event itself. So it was correct that South Africa refused that to happen and allowed it to follow diplomatic protocol, but the exchange of the handover at the Department of International Relations offices. More importantly, South Africa located its presidency firmly within multilateralism and the architecture of the UN and its institution. The declaration makes it very clear that we support not a multipolar world, but a multilateral world. And for any of you who have not read the declaration, I would invite you once again to study the declaration, as if for anything else, the way the global South sees the whole multilateral system and why we believe that the multilateral system is the only system that we have in respect of engaging our foreign policy issues. Through the agenda setting, South Africa built on the presidency of Indonesia, India, Brazil, to advance the following. And that's a very important point in terms of the continuity of the global South, starting from Indonesia in 2022, India in 2023, Brazil in 2024, and South Africa in 2025. It now moves, in my opinion, it starts to move to the global North, and we will see whether the issues raised in this period of the global South, whether those issues will continue under the global North chairpersonship of G20. But we managed to achieve global financial architecture reform, at least to raise the issues, climate and energy transitions, despite the enormous pressure not to deal with the matters of solidarity, equity, and sustainability. Africa's industrialization and debt sustainability was highlighted, technological governance and inclusive growth, and all of these align with the active non-alignment approach of reforming the multilateral institutions. So despite pressure to change the theme of its presidency, South Africa exercised agency on a global stage while maintaining independence from great power pressure, deepening the understanding of active non-alignment, core commitment to autonomous diplomacy. In sum, South Africa's hosting of the G20 Summit, of the 2025 G20 Summit, can justifiably be characterized as isomorphic excellence in the practice of non-alignment. It performed this diplomatic function with competence and autonomy, thereby advancing its status, amplifying the global South's priorities, and reinforced a foreign policy centered on strategic equidistance, multilateral reform, and middle power leadership. Allow me to just list a few of the issues or the achievements that South Africa achieved in the past year. It launched the AI Initiative for Africa in collaboration with the African Union and UNESCO, established the Technology Policy Assistance Facility, launched the G20 Clean Cooking Legacy Program, established the Africa Energy Efficiency Facilities, adopted the voluntary and non-binding high-level principles for combating illicit financial flows, championed the Ubuntu approaches on food security and nutrition and excessive food price volatility, initiated a G20 Africa Cooperation Agenda on Trade and Investment, established an Africa expert panel, championed and elevated the Golden Compact with the African Initiative, convened outreach meetings on food security in Cairo and on industrialization in Abuja, convened the second G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly at the high levels, commissioned the report of the G20 Extraordinary Committee on Global Inequality, held a highly successful and well-attended G20 high-level dialogue on debt sustainability, the cost of capital, and the reform of the international financial architecture, convened the G20 Africa expert panel chaired by the former South African Minister of Finance, Mr. Trevor Mango, successfully hosted 131 G20 preparatory meetings throughout the year. Let me repeat that. Successfully hosted 131 G20 preparatory meetings throughout the year. That's an average of 11 such meetings per month in a period of 12 months. The G20 Summit, and to that we must add the G20 Social Summit, and to that we must add the B20 Forum, concluded South Africa's calendar of meetings. But since South Africa took over the G20 presidency, President Ramaphosa committed to be building a better Africa and ensuring inclusivity. The presidency focused on advancing the global South and Africa's economic financial interest. As a G20 president, South Africa achieved the following. The AI Initiative of Africa, launched in collaboration with the African Union, established the Technology Policy Assistance Facility, and all the issues that I have listed. I will not do that again. We convened and of course, the most important thing, the two things that I would ask you to read. First, the declaration. The second is the report given to us by Professor Stiglitz on global inequality. And of course, the report on growth, debt, and finance and development. So if you read just those three reports, you will have a great sense in terms of what has happened and what South Africa laid for the basis to go forward. I'm not too sure that all of this hard work at the end of the day will be carried forward in this next period. It will be an absolute shame if it does not, because I think the groundwork that was covered here allows us as a global community, the G20, the United Nations, to pick up this hard work that was done over the 1 year, but not over this only our 1 year, but the continuum starting from Indonesia all the way to Brazil and now to South Africa. Because in essence, it is the global South and Africa's invitation, I would say, to the global North. Say, here's a program around which that if we can meet each other, we can build a better world. We can build a better world in which we all can live in while we're dealing with the challenges of the polycrisis. So I think I would want to leave it there and
Well,
take on the questions.
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interesting, thorough presentation from the South African side, and we've heard from Professor curtain on the overall G20. So I'm going to turn to the group in the room to see if there was any pressing questions out there and we can get launched, or whether we have any online. Do we have any incoming through
We have
from
one
blind audience?
section.
Okay, I will start with something, and then I'm sure people will sit going. We have two different observations, I think, of the multilateral future. We've got one, what linked particularly to the G20, which is very much the South African perspective and many others in terms of the global South joining with other middle income countries worldwide to support multilateralism and to continue the future of a global rules-based system despite features of unilateralism. That's one vision. Another vision, unfortunately, that is very strong from our southern neighbors is, but not just them, the absence of the US and China, the two big international economic powers, plus the absence of, I think it was 7 of the 19 members at the head of state level at the G20 meeting, actually signals the opposite, that this effort to hold to a multinational, multilateral future with is in fact crumbling under the pressure of the growing unilateralism that you see in the international community. So there's two different kind of visions out there. And I'm going to ask either Mo or Pastor Curtin, can you enlighten us of which road you think we're going down?
Who should go first?
Should I go first? Okay. First, I agree with that broad characterization that there is a reassertion of multilateralism, what works, but I must say a new debate about the very quality and the nature of multilateralism. Because I, for one, don't accept the rule-based international system, because I simply don't know what a rule-based international system is. If it means the United Nations, if it means international law, if it means sticking to all the agreements that we have in the UN, I'm all for that. And I think perhaps when we talk of the rule-based international order, we're talking about the United Nations rule-based international order. That I am 100% for. But any derivative of that, which basically was also a product of the United States administration, where they started to interpret the rules in their interest and got a whole lot of allies around those basic rules. But I think that era is now over. So that's the one thing. But the second, I wouldn't expand the club of the, for want of a better word, the unilateralist. I wouldn't want to expand them rapidly. I, for one, would not put China in that category, with all due respect. Partly because China also released its own global governance initiatives, the very interesting one-pager principles around which they talk about the same things. And even though Premier Xi were not at the meeting, they did have significant high-level participation. So I wouldn't want to put China in that category. I would agree that there are people, there are states who see their future very aligned to the United States, will fall under that sphere of influence. And what we may be seeing is the spheres of influence versus multilateralism unfolding in the next year or two. That's my take on it, John.
Mine, if you'd like my views, is neither. I think what we are seeing evolving, and it should be strengthened much more, is a G8 plus. I start with the Kananaskis Summit. which Prime Minister Carney hosted in Kananaskis in June. And from the beginning of his year as a G7 host, he worked very closely with his Commonwealth comrade, colleague, President Ramaphosa, to make the two work synergistically for the benefit of both. And we saw that with some of the achievements at each summit on critical minerals, which is not just another thing. Donald Trump knows all too well that he is presiding over a vulnerable America. He needs critical minerals. He doesn't have them at home. He can't get them at home. He needs them from their friends. And his closest friend geographically is Canada, whether we like it or not. But then you go down the other G20 countries, and they're all in there. And if they don't cooperate together, then we will all be necessarily following the hard power, critical minerals, of an authoritarian China, steadily moving to make Taiwan the next Ukraine. At Kananaskis, Prime Minister Carney invited, sure, as guests, not just the G7 or the EU, but also President Ramaphosa and other members of the leading G20 democracies. So I look forward to Emmanuel Macron now hosting the G7 at its next summit, Evian, France, in June. Will he also invite as a guest President Ramaphosa? If he does, will Donald Trump come? Donald Trump's come to President Carney's summit, to Justin Trudeau's in 2018. No G7 leaders has ever skipped one of the 51 G7 summits we've had. So I think Donald Trump would show up and there could and would and should meet President Ramaphosa, and they could have a dialogue and educate each other about why they need each other beyond the tweets that we're all reading when they fly across the so-called north-south divide. And there's a whole bunch of other issues that I think unify South Africa's G20 colleagues and Donald Trump's United States, China, Ukraine. South Africa stood with all of its G7 countries saying, Russia, you've got to send back the Ukrainian children you've kidnapped, all right? So I think we can trust South Africa on that one, close to what every parent in the G20 could understand. Global health, immigration. There's a long list. It's not just about interest rate policy and central banks and fiscal consolidation or spending. And one more word, and then I'll just end here. In the beginning, and we have to remind President Trump of this, when South Africa was admitted, without question, as a member of the G20, it was for two reasons. One, Trevor Manuel, the most respected finance minister of any of them at the IMF, and all the other finance ministers, Gordon Brown, Paul Martin, down the line, recognized that you needed Trevor Manuel at the table, and it was good that South Africa surfaced him again. But the other is look at the G20 countries that have caused at-home financial crises that spread to the world and harmed everybody outside, and look at those that didn't, but that rode to the rescue to help dampen them. South Africa is in the latter category, right? And we saw it at the Los Cabos G20 Summit, June 2012, when we finally stopped the European financial crisis before it could go global. So what we've had in the beginning, 2008, a vulnerable America, the financial crisis it caused, and then in Los Cabos, 4 years later, a powerful South Africa riding to the rescue when the United States did not. So even if you focus on the hardcore at the beginning of finance, a vulnerable America, a powerful, a capable South Africa with its other G20 friends. So I really do think that that logic will prevail over the coming year. We've just got to figure out the best way to educate our friends in the United States that that's where their future lies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, John. Got a question around the table?
There's one online, Marcia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Question
There's
online.
one question online. Please, can we hear that person? Please identify yourself first and then ask your question.
Or questions in the Q&A section.
Okay. All right. Well, we can't see them, so perhaps you could read the top one.
Sure. So Professor Curtin said that USA compliance to G20 commitments is 27%. What has Canada's compliance been?
Good question. Okay.
Marcia.
Historically, in the G7 from the beginning, it's quite high, not as high as the European Union, which is the highest. The United Kingdom typically second, but then Canada comes third, fourth. On some issues, though, we're number one. So on macroeconomic policy, we're number one in complying with the G20 commitments on that core economic subject. The United States has done well too, fourth, fifth in the top quartile, which is why it's never been nearly as low as 27%. So Donald Trump didn't like what Lula did as well, although he knows he's vulnerable, Donald Trump. So that's why he's just had to, Mr. Tariff Man, but take off the tariffs on Brazil's orange juice and coffee because he knows America can't produce them alone that are affordable for his MAGA base, which has every morning coffee and orange juice. So that's a kitchen table issue where America is vulnerable. And if you want to go down that list, boy, it's big. You ask Canadian cabinet ministers and our prime minister, he'd probably say graphite. That's critical minerals. But in the news today, yesterday, it's potash, which we have and the Americans don't.
Yeah.
Oh, uranium, the hardcore of America's military strategic security. They're still importing it from Russia, which could turn off the tap at any time. But number 3 in the world, right next door, it's Canada, Saskatchewan, Cameco. So they need Canadian uranium if Donald Trump doesn't want to be more deferential or vulnerable to Vladimir Putin, which is another big question.
John, I'm just going to stop you a second. I'm going to ask Ryan Clark. Ryan, did you want to add anything to that last question concerning Canada's performance at, no?
I wouldn't know the stats like John does, that's for sure.
All right.
But active member, and I can tell you that the public service works very hard to try and honor all of those commitments, that's for sure.
Yes.
And I'd leave it there, but
All right. Thank you. How about the second question? It looks like a long one there.
Yeah, we also have a hand raised.
All right.
We can go to that person.
All right. Try the hand raise.
Well, if you can unmute yourself and identify yourself and then ask your question, please.
Huh? What?
Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
go ahead.
Paul. Go ahead and
What?
speak.
Hey,
Your
We can
hand
hear
is
you.
raised. Did you want to ask a question?
who are you? Me, you talking to me?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm old. Um, this conversation has been more about Trump than about Africa, and I'm just wondering. I mean, I recognize that the United States is going to host the next G20, but how do we de-Trumpify our international agenda within the G20? And I want to congratulate John, Curtin. I mean, he's been a national asset in codifying and analyzing and the G7, G8, G20. But I just wonder how we go forward. If we could just can we ignore Trump or how do we manage him? Thank you.
Is that question to me, Paul?
I'm just going to ask, did you want to try this one or do you want to?
Oh my God, I don't want to get PNG'd. I don't want to get PNG'd. But there was a interesting discussion I heard from the chair of the B20 in South Africa, and he was having an analysis, the G20, and the issue about what to do with the disinviting. Now, and I think John Curtin is absolutely correct that South Africa is a member of the G20 in its own right. It is not there as a guest that can be invited or disinvited. So the question then arises is because this is the first time, but it's not actually the first time in the cheese, but the issue of the chair of the G20 taking a decision not to invite another member. I thought that by the process of consensus, that should at least be discussed by the G19. So the G19 should, by the process of the consensus making of decision making of the G20, the decision to disinvite South Africa should at least be discussed with the G19, all other members, for them to express their view. It is noteworthy that some members of the G20 have in fact expressed, like Germany, have expressed their disappointment with the approach taken by the United States on the matter. But I think it is also early days. It is really early days in respect of whether this will happen or will not happen. So I like Professor Curtin's approach that the G7 meeting in France allows an opportunity, a possibility space to engage with the United States on its concerns and to see whether you can achieve some kind of diplomacy there, and we could call that G7 diplomacy, to settle this matter. But it's a long way off. I don't think I too am not supportive of any call to boycott the G20. I think the forum itself is too powerful, too important for anyone to boycott it. And because also we know that there will be life after the G20 USA. There's G20 UK, and then there's Korea. So we need to keep an eye in terms of continuity. We need to keep an eye of how we engage to resolve whatever issues that President Trump has in regard to South Africa's G20 participation.
Thank you. John, did you want to add anything to that or?
Oh, I think very much we could expand on that quite proper instinct. Africa is a continental-sized Canada. Half of them speak English, half of them speak French. So Mark Carney has to, speaking in French to Emmanuel Macron, say make Evian basically a democratic G20. And even if you want to invite as a guest at the end for a special session, the dear leader of China, it's an idea he's already flirting with, and we do need China for some of the really big issues. Let me mention climate change. We could work that in. The grandparent of today's plurilateral summit institutions is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and Canada and South Africa, Nelson Mandela, South Africa, were there at the beginning, 1960-61, and then, of course, when the Rainbow Revolution won. So we could look to our Commonwealth colleagues who's chairing the next CHOGM, and couldn't we do a special one? It's an African dominated club, and have the special CHOGM work for Africa without Donald Trump there, but CHOGM is devoted to democracy too. So there are other institutions and fora, and the United Kingdom is a member of the G20 Troika, also the permanent five at the United Nations. It could host, if Donald Trump won't, the same kind of meeting that South Africa did, which the ambassador, the High Commissioner, probably highlighted in September, right? The G20 is coming. What do all of you who wish to attend at the foreign ministers level at least wish to input into the process and then deliver the message? Keir Starmer is one of Donald Trump's favorite leaders at the moment, and so far, so he'd probably get a hearing too. So, Paul, as you know from your long experience in diplomacy, there's a lot of venues through summits and through various UN forum too, where Canada has a voice and some influence that really could help.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a few more minutes. If there are any questions around the table, I see one in the back there. Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Victoria Shore of Africa Trade Desk. My question is a bit perhaps nitty gritty and for the High Commissioner, which is that the African credit rating agency that's being created, depending on how far along we go, by the AU, is that related in any way to all of the multilateral discussions that South Africa was having on reforming the financial system leading up to the G20 Summit? Where's the relationship in this, if there is one?
That's a very good, very, very, very insightful question. So on the matter of rating agencies, but let's be clear, one of the rating agencies recently announced that it wants to open offices in Africa to better understand the ratings to better understand Africa, so it could review its ratings. So of course, that begs the question that these rating agencies have been giving ratings of Africa based on not understanding Africa. And of course, such ratings in concrete terms, and now I just want to put on my banking hat, ratings is simply an increase in the cost of capital. It's a price. So when you deem a continent to be riskier, then you would increase the price by which you would offer loans. And it's at the heart of what is one of the challenges of debt sustainability in Africa at the moment.
Also entrepreneurship, because
Or the entrepreneurship, because it goes all the way down. So yes, we are deeply committed as part of this financial architecture reform to get our rating agencies, north-based rating agencies, to better understand Africa. Because I would think that countries who are resilient should actually have better ratings, right, than countries who are not resilient. And if anyone wants to look at the history of Africa, you will see how resilient African societies are in respect of all the things they have gone for. So just in terms of pure understanding of entropy economics, one would want to suggest that African countries' ratings should be better than most other countries' ratings. I mean, one of the issues of ratings relates to predictability. My God, have we not had an experience of unpredictability in the neighborhood here in terms of today, this is the tariff, tomorrow, that is the tariff, the next day, this is the tariff. And if that is not a measure of predictability, then I think we should have a revisit to the very question of predictability and rating agencies. So yes, the short answer is, or the long answer is, the Global South in generally, and yeah, it is a product of the new development bank, is also considering whether the rating agencies that are in the world today, are they sensitive to the issues that Global South countries find? And if not, can they be modified? And if yes, great. If not, do we then need our own versions of rating agencies to help us raise the capital that we will need to raise? And this is not to say that there's a whole basket of things that the South, and in particular African countries, need to get right, to get in place, to promote greater trade integration, greater flows of capital and goods between the countries. But that's a task that we are doing. But I think there's this other basket, and which ratings is part of it, needs to also reform so that we could have the kind of appropriate sustainable financing that the world needs.
Good question, very interesting answers. And one last question, I think.
George Jacoby, former diplomat in Africa, including in Libya when Gaddafi was financing a lot of the African Union development. But I just wondered about the role of the BRICS, of which South Africa is a member and some other G20 members, in either reconciling or taking on some of the issues that are present in the G20, particularly the ones that are totally disrupting the international economy, such as American overreach, perhaps on sanctions or on control of the financial system, or on the tariffs, which are just out of control. The role of the BRICS.
Okay, so I would start off by saying that the BRICS is one of the most misunderstood formations in the global north, but not in the global south. It's misunderstood because it is seen firstly as a competitor. It's a competitor to other blocs. It's a competitor to the United Nations. It's wants to de-dollarize, etc. And often the BRICS formation, and I think when you look at how BRICS has been received in the global north, There's been for a long while, there was an ambivalence of what the BRICS is all about. And then it went on steroidal, the perception went on steroidal that it is anti-global north, etc. Now, I can, and thank God we have the Brazilian ambassador here, and he's in his capacity, previous capacity, current capacities, will tell you that is not the way BRICS was envisaged. BRICS was envisaged first and foremost of a group of countries coming together. Its origins is actually in an organization called IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. When three countries came together to say, how could we cooperate amongst each other in regard to what we perceive to be our common issues? And those common issues were arrangement of flights, movement of people between capitals, food, and financing. Eventually, IPSA, through another process, morphed into BRICS. But the real hallmark of BRICS is the new development bank. It's a bank that was created by these organizations in order to aid financing amongst themselves to raise capital on the global markets, in order to finance the infrastructure needs within these countries. That fundamentally is what I would invite you to see BRICS as. It is not a political formation standing opposed to the United Nations. And if you notice BRICS, and in fact, if you notice, every time any group is led by a BRICS member, they make the point in the very beginning of their declarations that we support the United Nations, the Charter, the respect for international territories, etc. But somehow that messaging, which is deliberate by the leaders of BRICS to the leadership in the global north, gets missed. They don't see that part. They skip over that part and say, but you are forming an alternate currency. Well, let me tell you about alternate currency. And again, I put on my cap as a banker. That South Africa used to lend money to other African countries for infrastructure development. But we have to lend that money in dollar. The poor, so we take South African rand and we convert it into dollar. You then lend a dollar to an African country, whose local currency must then be converted to back to the dollar. And I can tell you just on the dollar exchange rate, we have been rendering those countries incapable of paying back the loan, not because they were not having the local currency to pay back the loan, but when you make the conversion to the dollar. So the dollar transactions, while it is valid, has been strangulating certain African. So when we then say we want to use local currency in the exchange amongst ourselves, this does not mean we are anti-dollar. This means that we want to promote economic sustainability amongst ourselves. So I think BRICS is very misunderstood. It's not an alternative to the UN. It's not in competition. In fact, I think it's a complementary system to the United Nations. It is a complementary system to global governance. And the more it is viewed as such, the better it will be for the world. I don't know whether, Ambassador, you would agree with me.
Well, I think we're going to have to bring this wonderful panel to an end if we've got off on topics that are very well. We're informed a great deal from both of you gentlemen on things that are beyond the immediate scope of the G20, but of course, all of these things are interconnected, in truth. So, John, thank you very much for attending from Montreal. We very much appreciate it. Ambassador, thank you very much. High Commissioner, thank you very much for your attendance here and your great participation. And I'll turn it over to Sheikh to conclude the session.
Thank you so much, Marsha, for your excellent moderation. I will be very short. On behalf of the Africa Study Group, I would like to thank our panelists for their excellent presentation, Professor John Gilton. There's no surprise to us here. And Ambassador Mo, whom I am privileged to call my brother. Please note that this session has been recorded and we will post it to YouTube. And whoever wants to have a copy, I will be pleased to send you the link so that you can keep it by yourself. I would like to thank our colleagues from the Africa Summit Secretariat, Mafoya Communication Director, as well as Cameroon. The Cameron Christie, who is the Director of the CIC National Capital Branch, for all the effort that went into organizing this session. Thank you to Professor Teddy and to Nietzsche. We are home here for many years. I know he couldn't be here today, but merci Anne pour votre assistance habituelle. The next event of the Africa Study Group will be next year because we are the year now in January. And we will be talking about the economic dimension of the Canada-Africa strategy. I know we have now approximately 400 members, and I have been getting emails and calls from Africa, from Canada. Let's talk about this. The strategy is there now. It's an excellent strategy. We will be working on it. We will support it, but let the strategy go ahead. So please, to our audience, be patient. The strategy is there. When the child is born, let the child start working before start asking him, what is your future? So we will do the discussion on the strategy. And in January, I promise you, we will have a small discussion before the first anniversary of the strategy. We will also talk, we are getting a lot of emails asking us to talk about peace and security in Africa. During the last year, 3-4 days, people have been asking us, what is happening in Guinea-Bissau? What is happening in Benin? What is happening in West Africa? Do we have this sudden lack of security coming back with the coup d'etat in Africa? Why is that going? I cannot tell you, but we will try to bring experts who will help us to understand what is going on, what has been done, and what has not been done. And we will try to understand this. And we have Canadian interests there. And as you know, Canada is highly interested in helping to restore peace and security in the Sahel region. And we will talk about this. We will find a way of doing it. We will also talk about Congo. We will talk about Sudan and our Sudanese friends. I know you have been asking me for the last 3 months. We will organize again a session in Sudan. Each month we try to organize a session, but give us time. We have a priority issue here. And so far, the strategy, African strategy, was our main strategy, our main priority. But we will continue balancing our priority. And please continue sending us feedbacks, and we will continue working together with you. This will be all for today. I wish you a good health for all ambassadors who can. And it has been a good session, I think. Those who are online, merci à vous de votre présence. Merci, professeur Kirton, ambassadeur Mo. Merci à tout le monde, depending on where you are. I know many people in Africa are watching this session. But depending on where you are, good evening, good morning, and good night.
Good night.
Merci, à la prochaine.
Nice.